The rain had been falling all day, a steady drizzle that blurred the world outside James Sunderland's car windows into a smear of grey. The rhythm of the wipers did nothing to ease the pounding in his head. His fingers clenched tightly on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, eyes raw from sleepless nights. He hadn't been able to sleep much since she died. Since Mary died. The very thought of her name was like a blade twisting in his chest, yet it was also the only thing that gave him strength to keep moving forward. He remembered her laugh, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she would tilt her head when she spoke to him. Gone. All of it, snatched away by sickness, leaving only silence and grief. And yet, the letter. James had read it so many times, the words burned into his brain. James. I'm waiting for you in our special place. It was written in her handwriting, perfectly, impossibly her handwriting. The loops of her letters, the way she dotted her I's. He knew it was her, but how? Mary had been gone for years. He had watched her fade away, had stood by her bed when she took her last breath. There was no chance she could write this letter. And still, it existed. It was here, folded carefully in his pocket, whispering promises he could not ignore. His special place. Their special place. Silent Hill. The words seemed to pulse inside him as he drove along the misty road that led to the town. Silent Hill, where once they had spent the happiest days of their lives together. A quiet little town wrapped in fog, where the lake reflected the sky like glass, where Mary smiled more than she ever had back home. It had been a place of peace. A sanctuary. Now it was calling him back. James pulled the car to a stop near the old observation point. The rain slowed, but the fog was thicker here, curling like ghostly fingers across the ground. Beyond it, the road into town was nothing but a white void. He sat in silence for a long time, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, his breath heavy with dread. It was insane. He knew it. Mary was dead. There was no letter. There couldn't be. But if there was even the slightest chance, if she was waiting for him in Silent Hill, he had to go. He had to see for himself. He slipped the letter from his pocket once more, staring at the familiar handwriting. His heart trembled. His mind screamed at him to throw it away, to run from this madness, but his heart would not let go. He pressed the paper to his chest, shut his eyes, and stepped out of the car. The air was colder than he expected. The fog swallowed him immediately, damp and suffocating, muting every sound except for the crunch of gravel under his shoes. James stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, his gaze darting nervously through the white haze. Every shadow seemed to move, every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps following too close. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the fog, disappearing like a throat that swallowed all light. Somewhere deep within it, Silent Hill was waiting. Somewhere beyond that choking white curtain, he hoped Mary was waiting too. His stomach knotted as he took his first step down the winding trail into the town. The silence was heavy, oppressive, like the weight of earth above a coffin. James could feel it pressing in on him, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. And then, just for a moment, he thought he heard her voice. Soft. Fragile. Familiar. Calling his name. James froze. His breath caught in his throat. The fog rippled like something alive. He spun around, searching desperately, but there was nothing. Just the endless, shifting whiteness, and the echo of her voice dissolving into it. He tightened his jaw, forcing his feet to move forward. Silent Hill was waiting. And so was she. The fog grew thicker the deeper James walked, curling and folding in on itself until it felt less like mist and more like a living thing. He tried to focus on the crunch of his footsteps, grounding himself with each sound, but even that began to fade. The air here swallowed noise like a bottomless pit. As he descended the narrow forest trail, the silence pressed harder against his ears. His breath puffed in pale clouds. At times he thought he heard movement, branches snapping, the faint drag of something along the dirt path, but when he turned, there was nothing. The sign appeared suddenly, emerging out of the fog like an apparition. "Welcome to Silent Hill." The words were chipped, rusted with age. Moss crept along the edges. James stopped in front of it, staring, his chest tightening. He remembered standing here years ago, Mary's arm looped through his. She had been smiling, the sunlight breaking through the fog, the lake shimmering in the distance. The memory ached like a fresh wound. Now, the town beyond was drowned in a whiteness so dense he couldn't even see the streets. James stepped forward. The road was cracked, broken in places as if the earth itself had shifted beneath it. Trash was scattered along the gutters, papers soaked from the mist. The once familiar storefronts loomed like gravestones, their windows boarded or shattered, glass glittering faintly in the dull light. Doors hung open, creaking with a hollow rhythm as the wind moved through them. It wasn't just abandoned, it was consumed. James tightened his coat around him and pushed on. His footsteps echoed strangely, as though the streets themselves were hollow. He passed a playground, its swings swaying though there was no breeze. Rust ate through the chains, and one seat dangled by a single link, twisting and turning like a hanged body. He felt eyes on him. James stopped. His skin crawled. The fog shifted across the street, thickening into a shape that almost resembled a figure. A shadow, just barely human. It stood still, too still, as if it were watching. "Mary?" His voice cracked. The figure didn't move. James blinked, and it dissolved into the mist. He rubbed his eyes with trembling fingers, telling himself it wasn't real. Just nerves, just exhaustion, just grief. But deep down, something in him knew better. Silent Hill had always been strange, dreamlike in its beauty. Now it was dreamlike in its nightmare. The sound came suddenly. A low, wet dragging against pavement. James spun, his eyes scanning the haze. The noise grew louder, scraping, shuffling, accompanied by a sickly wheeze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he backed against a crumbling brick wall, straining to see. Then he saw it. Something stumbled into view, half-formed in the fog. Its body was twisted, flesh mottled and stretched as though sewn wrong. Its arms dangled too long, its legs bent awkwardly. Its head was wrapped in stained cloth, twitching with spasms, as though suffocating inside its own skin. James's stomach lurched. His mind screamed to run, but his body froze. The thing dragged one leg as it lurched closer, its breath rasping like knives against wet stone. "No, no, this isn't real," James whispered. The creature gurgled, a sound thick with fluid. Then it staggered toward him, reaching with trembling, boneless arms. James bolted. His shoes slammed against the cracked pavement, the mist blurring everything. He didn't look back, but he could hear it, those dragging steps, that horrible rasp, following. He ran past hollow shops, rusted cars left to rot, through a maze of fog that closed around him like a cage. When his lungs burned, he stumbled into an alleyway, pressed his back against the wall, and slid down, gasping. His chest heaved as sweat mixed with the damp air. The dragging stopped. Silence again. James squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the letter in his pocket like a lifeline. His pulse throbbed in his throat. He could almost hear Mary's voice again, faint, tender, whispering his name from somewhere deep in the fog. James forced himself to his feet. He couldn't stop now. Whatever Silent Hill had become, whatever monsters it hid, he would endure. Because Mary was here. Somewhere. Waiting. James's footsteps echoed hollowly as he made his way deeper into the deserted streets. The fog wrapped around him like a shroud, disorienting, endless. At times, the silence was so absolute it felt like his heartbeats were the only sound left in the world. Then, suddenly, the silence would break, by distant groans, metal scraping, or a scream that dissolved before he could pinpoint its source. He tried to keep moving, one street bleeding into another. Stores he once recognized were now warped by decay, windows smashed, walls blackened with mold, signs broken and dangling. The town wasn't dead. It was rotting. James stopped at a familiar place, Rosewater Park. Their special place. The memory of Mary's laughter echoed through him. They had sat on a bench by the lake, feeding the birds, watching the fog roll lazily across the water. He could still see her face, bright, alive, unbroken by illness. But now, the park was hollow. The fountain was cracked, dry, filled with grime. The benches were coated in rust. The lake beyond was swallowed completely in fog, a blank sheet of white. James whispered into the emptiness. "Mary, are you really here?" The only answer was the sound of wings, crows bursting suddenly from the trees above, cawing as they vanished into the void. James's heart lurched. Then he heard it, a dragging. Not the same shuffling from before, this was heavier, deliberate, metallic. He turned toward the sound. Something moved in the mist. At first, just a shadow, huge, broad-shouldered, towering. Then it stepped closer, its outline impossible to mistake. James's breath froze in his chest. The figure was massive, its head encased in a colossal, angular helmet shaped like a jagged pyramid of rusted iron. Its body was human, yet not. Its flesh looked raw, streaked with blood, muscles bulging beneath filthy, butcher's attire. In one hand, it dragged an enormous blade, taller than James himself, its edge screeching against the pavement. James's entire body shook. His throat tightened with the urge to scream, but no sound came. The thing stopped, standing impossibly still, as though it were waiting. He couldn't look away. The helmeted head turned, slowly, deliberately, toward him. James staggered back, his hand brushing against the cold bars of the park's gate. His mind screamed that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. Yet the scraping of that enormous blade against the ground vibrated through his bones. The monster took a single step forward. James bolted, his breath tearing in his lungs. He didn't know where he was going, he just ran, blindly, through the fog. Streets twisted into alleys, alleys into dead ends, but still he pushed forward, the sound of dragging steel following like a death knell. At last, he stumbled into a small apartment building. He shoved the door open, slammed it shut behind him, and collapsed against the wall, gasping. Inside, the building smelled of mildew and rot. The wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing blackened plaster beneath. Water dripped steadily somewhere in the dark. The silence was suffocating, broken only by his ragged breaths. James slid down the wall, clutching his chest, trembling. He pressed the letter to his lips, whispering, "Mary, please. I'm here." Then came the sound. From the ceiling. From the walls. A wet, crawling shuffle, like flesh dragging across wood. James looked up. The light flickered. Something hung in the hallway ahead, a figure, twisted, suspended by ropes of flesh. Its body writhed, bound in its own skin, faceless, twitching. The walls pulsed as if alive, breathing with the creature. James's stomach twisted into knots. The letter crinkled in his fist. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs refused to move. The air itself felt like it was choking him, whispering. Mocking. "James. James, come closer." He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to breathe. His heart thundered. He had come here for Mary. He couldn't give in, not yet. But deep down, he knew. Silent Hill wasn't just showing him monsters. It was showing him something about himself. The apartment building pressed down on James like a tomb. Every hallway stretched too far, the doors warped and crooked, leading into rooms filled with nothing but dust and shadows. The air was thick with mildew, but beneath it lingered something sharper, like blood dried on iron. His flashlight barely pierced the gloom, but it was all that kept him moving. Each beam of light fell on rotted furniture, walls crawling with stains, mirrors cracked like fractured bones. And always, he could hear it, faint whispers threading through the air, murmuring his name, sometimes in Mary's voice, sometimes in a voice that was not hers at all. He told himself he wasn't afraid. He told himself this was just the town, playing tricks. But deep inside, fear hollowed him out. At the end of one hallway, he pushed open a door. Inside, the room looked like a hospital ward, though it was impossible this apartment could hold such a place. Beds were lined against the walls, sheets soaked in black fluids, 4 poles rusted and bent. The stench was suffocating. James's flashlight caught movement. A figure lay on one of the beds. At first, he thought it was a corpse, but then it twitched. Slowly, it turned toward him. Its head was wrapped in gauze, its face entirely covered. Its body writhed as though invisible hands pulled at it from beneath the sheets. James stumbled back, choking on his breath. The figure sat up. The gauze stretched as it opened its mouth, too wide, splitting until flesh tore. A wail spilled out, not entirely human, a sound that carried grief and rage twisted together. James ran, slamming the door shut, his chest heaving. The sound continued to echo through the halls, muffled but unrelenting, a scream that seemed to claw inside his skull. He pressed his hands to his ears, whispering to himself. It isn't real. It isn't real. Mary, I'm here. I'll find you. But Silent Hill had other plans. As James turned another corner, his flashlight flickered, sputtered, then went out. Darkness swallowed him whole. Panic surged, and he smacked the side of the flashlight desperately. The light returned in a weak beam, and caught something standing inches from his face. He gasped, staggering backward. It was a mirror. He hadn't noticed it before. But what he saw inside was not himself. The reflection was him, but gaunt, hollow-eyed, lips cracked. His skin was bruised, his shirt torn and stained with blood. His reflection grinned at him, though James himself did not move. No, James whispered. The reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. The surface rippled as if it were liquid. Slowly, the other James began to push forward, trying to crawl through. James stumbled back, nearly tripping over debris. His chest burned, his heart hammering. He wanted to scream, but his voice was gone. He turned, fleeing into the dark. The hallways twisted, endless, looping. No matter which door he opened, the building seemed to close in on him, reshaping itself. He entered one room only to find himself back in the same hallway. He descended a staircase only to return to the same floor he'd left. Silent Hill had become a labyrinth designed to unravel his sanity. And through it all, he kept hearing her voice. James, why did you leave me? Why did you let me suffer? The words tore him open. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. I didn't, Mary, I was there. I stayed with you. The air itself seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing with each beat of his heart. The whispers grew louder, suffocating, until James thought his skull would split. When he finally forced himself to his feet, he saw it again, at the end of the hall. The pyramid head. Silent. Waiting. Its enormous blade dragging slowly, carving grooves into the floor. James froze, terror choking him. The monster tilted its massive helmet toward him, as if mocking his fear. This time, James knew there was no escape. Silent Hill wanted him to face it. James's body froze as the towering figure advanced. The sound of steel dragging against the ground reverberated through the apartment, a sickening, metallic shriek that burrowed into his skull. The pyramid head moved with dreadful slowness, each step deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world. James's chest tightened with a primal recognition, this was not just another creature. This was something worse. Something that belonged here. The blade scraped closer. Sparks flew across the broken floor. James staggered back until his shoulders pressed against a wall. His flashlight shook violently in his hand, its beam cutting jagged arcs through the dark. "Stay away," he cried, his voice cracking. The thing didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge his words. Its massive head turned slightly, the sharp edges of the iron pyramid glinting in the weak light. James grabbed a broken pipe from the debris at his feet. His hands trembled so hard he nearly dropped it. The absurdity of it hit him, standing there, clutching a rusted piece of metal against this monstrosity that could cleave him in half with a single swing. The monster stopped. Silence pressed heavy. James could hear his heartbeat echoing in his ears, thundering louder than the stillness. Then, with terrifying suddenness, the pyramid head raised its weapon. James dove sideways as the blade came down, splitting the floor where he had stood. The ground shook, wood splintering, dust exploding into the air. James scrambled to his feet, swung the pipe wildly, striking the monster's side. It didn't react. The pyramid head turned its massive frame toward him again, the helmet groaning against its own weight. James swung again, hitting its shoulder. The sound rang like metal on stone, useless. The creature's arm shot out, impossibly fast, seizing him by the collar. James screamed as it lifted him effortlessly, dangling like a child's doll. The iron stench of blood radiated from its body. He struggled, kicking, but the grip was unbreakable. For a moment, the helmet tilted, as though the thing were examining him. Judging him. James's vision blurred with terror. "What are you?" he cried, his voice ragged. "Why are you?" The monster hurled him across the hallway. He slammed into the wall, the pipe clattering from his hand. Agony shot through his ribs. He coughed, tasting blood, his vision swimming. The sound of dragging steel returned. Slow. Patient. The executioner advanced. James crawled, his palms scraping against broken tiles, forcing his body forward. He could feel it looming behind him, the heat of its presence, the inevitability of its blade. He stumbled through a doorway, slamming it shut, then pressed his weight against it as the building shuddered with each strike from the other side. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The wood groaned, ready to splinter. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. James pressed his ear against the door, trembling. Nothing. No dragging. No movement. The monster was gone, as though it had never been there. He collapsed to his knees, sucking in breath, his chest burning with every inhale. He felt the letter in his pocket, warm against his skin, as though it were alive. He pulled it out, reading Mary's handwriting through blurred eyes. "I'm waiting for you, in our special place." James's tears smeared the ink. His chest heaved. "Mary, why are you calling me here?" The walls around him seemed to breathe again, pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't his. The whispers slithered back into his ears. "Because you belong here, James, because you never left me." James shook his head violently, covering his ears. "No. That's not true." But the town was merciless. With every step, every shadow, every monster, it was peeling him open, layer by layer. And somewhere deep down, James began to realize the most terrifying thought of all. The pyramid head wasn't hunting him. It was punishing him. James stumbled through the corridors of the apartment building like a man half dead. His ribs screamed with every breath, his head throbbed from where he'd slammed against the wall. Yet pain was the least of his fears. The image of that towering executioner burned into his mind, unshakable. The town wasn't trying to kill him outright. It was wearing him down, grinding him into something fragile, breakable. Each door he opened seemed to lead him deeper into a nightmare that was both Silent Hill and not Silent Hill. The rooms bled into each other, a kitchen that smelled of rot, a hospital ward lined with beds of twitching bodies, a child's playroom where toys were nailed to the ceiling, their plastic faces melted and distorted. Everywhere he went, the whispers followed. Sometimes they were in Mary's voice, soft, pleading. Sometimes they were in his own, distorted, mocking him. "Why did you abandon me, James? Why did you let me rot in that bed? You wanted it to end. You wished me gone." James pressed his hands to his ears until his nails drew blood. "No. That's not true. I loved you, Mary, I still love you." But the walls didn't believe him. In one room, he found a mirror, whole, unbroken this time. He forced himself to look. His reflection stared back at him, pale and gaunt, but then its mouth twisted into a sneer. "You're lying," it said. James stumbled back, his stomach turning. His reflection pressed its palms against the glass, smearing bloody handprints. Its eyes glowed faintly red, hatred burning inside them. "You wanted her gone." The mirror shattered without warning. Shards flew outward, slicing his skin. James cried out, shielding his face as glass rained down. When he lowered his arms, the room was empty again, just peeling wallpaper and silence. But the damage was done. The words lingered in him, poisoning him. He pushed onward, each step heavier than the last. He descended staircases that seemed endless, down into basements that shouldn't exist. The deeper he went, the more the world changed. The walls oozed black fluids, chains hung from the ceilings, hooks swayed in the dark. The smell of blood was overwhelming. And the creatures, God, the creatures. They crawled out of the shadows, twisted things that should not walk. Some dragged themselves along on hands with no fingers. Others writhed in sacks of flesh, limbs pressing against their skin as though desperate to escape. James fought them with his pipe, his arms trembling, the clang of metal against flesh ringing in his ears. Every strike made him gag, because when they bled, it wasn't blood but a thick, milky fluid that reeked of sickness. And still, their faces, he could almost see her. Mary. Or what remained of her. At last, James stumbled into a room lit by a single swinging bulb. The floor was slick with water, or perhaps something thicker. The walls groaned with a wet sound, as though they were breathing. In the center of the room sat a hospital bed. James froze. The bed was clean, spotless, pristine in contrast to everything else. On it lay the shape of a woman, her face turned away, her chest rising and falling faintly beneath white sheets. Mary? His voice broke on the name. His legs carried him forward against his will. He reached for the sheets, trembling, desperate. The woman's head turned. It wasn't Mary. Her face was featureless, smooth skin stretched taut where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Her head jerked unnaturally as she sat up, arms snapping upward like broken marionette strings. A shrill hiss tore from her non-existent mouth. James screamed, stumbling back. The bed bolted upright, metal twisting as the faceless woman lunged toward him, her arms elongating, grasping. He swung the pipe with everything he had. It connected, and the creature shrieked, its skin tearing open to reveal not flesh, but countless human faces pressing beneath, screaming, wailing, suffocating. James dropped the pipe. His mind cracked like thin glass. He clutched the letter in his pocket, tears streaking down his face. Mary, please, just tell me where you are. The whispers answered. You already know. And in that moment, James realized the most terrifying truth. Silent Hill wasn't just punishing him. It was making him remember.